Boys are weak. Boys are easy.
That's what my dad always says.
Anyways, again, good morning. Your grades are up, obviously. Hopefully I didn't ruin anyone's weekend based upon your grades. Or, I guess I wouldn't have ruined anyone's weekend. It would have been your own doing. Just you would have been mad at me for whatever reason. But overall, grades were pretty good. I think the average prior to the scale was a 77.
How big was it?
8 points. So, highest grade was after the scale was 100. So, we had the highest grade prior to was 92. I think the lowest grade was somewhere in the 60s. So, anyways, now we have the next part of the course is ecology. We move away from animal stuff, animal development. And we move on to sort of beyond the organism by itself. Move on to ecology. Okay? This will be part of your final exam, all right, which will also, the material you cover from here to the end of the class, end of the course, will be on your final exam, all right? You'll have a section of your final exam will be on this, and then the rest will be cumulative. Sort of like,
Wait, I thought we weren't having a cumulative final.
we weren't?
So the last test.
That's why we decided to.
Okay, then we have a lot to cover then, so that you have enough for ecology. Anyways, all right, that's fine. I don't mind. At any rate, ecology, okay, is the scientific study of interactions between organisms and the environment. Eco, right? You've heard ecotourism, right? Eco-friendly. You've seen that eco type of prefix before, refers to the environment. All right? So ecology is really the study of how things interact with the environment. All right? Whether it be living or non-living things. All right? These interactions, all right, between the environment and the living things and non-living things, all right, determine the distribution of organisms. Right, where certain things are found, where certain animals, organisms, plants, etc., can live or be distributed. All right, and so modern ecology, which is ecology is being offered in the fall. If anyone's interested in this stuff, I suggest you take it. Includes observation and experimentation. All right, to see what's happening and how it can be changed. In terms of ecology, all right, let's consider this sort of situation. There was a rediscovery of a nearly extinct harlequin toad in Costa Rica. Okay. Now, a rediscovery of a thought to be extinct organism, what does that tell you? What questions does it raise? Well, one question is, what environmental factors limit their geographic distribution? And what factors, food, pathogens, affect population size? Those are two general ecological questions. All right, we want to think about anything that you're interested in, whether it be why do great white sharks migrate past Cape Cod, and what makes them come in closer to the shore as opposed to staying further out at sea? Why do they come closer to Block Island sometimes in Rhode Island rather than staying further out at sea? Right? What affects their population size? Why is there a prominence of great white sharks that are found in Baja, Mexico, off the coast of Baja, Mexico every year? Right? Those are ecological questions that are driven by their behavior, population size, other factors in terms of ocean currents, prey, right? Food availability, right? Those are all biotic and abiotic factors. Right? So, Harlequin toad. What do you think? Are you afraid of frogs, Michelle?
Actually, I am.
Okay, don't look. Well, it's a toad, so you'd be okay. Okay? So there's your toad. All right, and what would affect whether or not it's extinct or not? Or thought to be extinct, let's put it that way. All right, so predators, it's really bright. What does the bright color of the toad represent? Usually like a warning that it's not going to taste good or it's going to have some type of poison associated with it, right? So that's a way of that's a adaptation to avoid predation. All right, so its population size depends upon predators, right? Depends upon its availability, its food availability, and its habitat, right? One of the largest single reason for loss of species loss is what? Habitat destruction. All right, so loss of habitat, right, whether it be rainforest or grasslands or whatever it is, that's the single biggest responsibility for loss of species. So ecology we were just talking about basically organismal ecology to population ecology, and we're going to concentrate on that a little bit in this chapter. All right, we're talking about organismal ecology, meaning what? So we're talking about ecology. All right, so dealing with a particular organism, one, right? And then we move on from that to, say, to population ecology. All right, the difference being that in organismal ecology, we're looking at the physiology, the structure, etc., of an organism and how it fits with its environment. Okay? This includes some evolutionary adaptations, such as what we see in terms of the markings, the bright color of the toad, etc. All right? Population ecology. Factors that affect a total population. Okay? So they're sort of interactive, organismal and population. Organism depends upon one organism, but usually that's also directly related to the total population ecology as well. What is a population? Abby? All right, so a group of organisms that share the same characteristics. All right, so a group of individuals of the same species living in an area. All right, so we have a population in this class, all right, of Bio 122, Section 21 students, right? That is part of the greater population of Springfield College students, which is part of the greater population of Greater Springfield, Western Massachusetts, the United States, and on and on and on and on, right? So you can subset out populations based upon a whole set of characteristics, all right? But what affects this population, the fact that you are listening to me as a teacher, is different from Biology 122, Section 22 students or 23 students who have Dr. Woon as a teacher, right? All right, so that's a big difference. Now, would you say Springfield College is a population or a community? And what's the difference? Is it a community or a population? A community. So what's the difference between a community and a population? Abby.
Community can be interaction between different species.
Community can be interaction between different species, all right, and different populations, right? So a community is a group of populations of different species in an area. So the fact that you walk from what's the dorm back here, International or whatever it is, all right, Alumni or Reed or whatever. You walk from Reed to Hickory here, and you get accosted by by one of the geese, which there's 2 or 3 of them that really will run after you. That is an interaction. That's a community, right? Those geese are a species that are living in this area that are interacting between different populations, right? So that is a community. In terms of community ecology, that's the type of interactions we're talking about, right? Interactions between plants, animals that are living in the same area, right? And a lot of that depends upon each other, right? The geese are here because, well, food's pretty available. You can run up and down the green here, eat plenty of vegetation, go out in Lake Massasoit, the Water Shops Pond, eat some algae. They're happy. No one's going to bother, right? So community ecology. Above that, we have ecosystem ecology. What's that next level, that jump? So to understand what ecosystem ecology is, you have to understand what an ecosystem is. So what is an ecosystem? Ben?
It's to do with weather too.
So it has to do with weather, okay? What's that?
Does it have to do with predator-prey relationship?
It has to do, predator-prey would have to do something with community ecology, and it has everything to do, it also has something to do with an ecosystem. So, but what Ben said has to do with weather, yes it does, and it also has to do with, instead of predator-prey relationship, let's talk about energy flow, okay? Because that's what is happening in an ecosystem, right? A predator preys on some other smaller animal or some other thing, and it's really consuming energy, and it's flowing through the entire system, all right? So an ecosystem is the community of organisms in an area, right? So, in fact, we have this little ecosystem of, say, a northern temperate forest that we actually live in, or an urban ecosystem which Springfield, the city of Springfield has, all right? And the physical factors in which they interact, right? The fact that there's enough sunlight, trees, buildings, whatever it might be. All right, so an urban ecosystem is much different than what you might see at East Campus, which is more of a northern deciduous forest ecosystem. All right, which is different than, say, a swamp, which is different from the desert, etc. Okay? So ecosystem ecology, all right, emphasizes energy flow, predator-prey relationship, whether or not there's food availability, how does that work through the entire ecosystem, all right? And how does one depend upon the other? All right, in chemical cycling, among various biotic and abiotic components. What is a biotic component versus an abiotic component? I can't understand mumbling. What is a biotic component? Something that's living. So the organisms, trees, whatever is there, okay, that are living in that area. Give me an example of an abiotic component.
Rocks.
What?
Rocks.
Rocks, okay. So, rocks.
Sorry.
Let's say landscape, okay? The landscape. What about water, light, temperature, right? They are not living factors, but they influence what does live in that area, okay? So ecosystem ecology. Above that, we can say landscape ecology focuses on the exchanges of energy, materials, and organisms across multiple ecosystems. All right, the fact that we have a wetland ecology or ecosystem in the pond, okay, versus a deciduous forest ecosystem that surrounds the pond. All right, that is a change in the landscape. Right, that's all different landscape from the Connecticut River, right, and the urban landscape that is Greater Springfield. Okay, so landscape or a seascape, right, is defined as a mosaic of connected ecosystems. All right? So these are not separate or exclusive things. They depend and interact with one another. All right? And then the all-encompassing global ecology is concerned with the biosphere. What is the biosphere? Let me ask someone on that side of the room, because I feel like I'm neglecting you. What is the biosphere? Brittany.
Everything, atmosphere is included.
Okay. So it's really everything globally that where life can exist. All right, so we're talking about terrestrial, aquatic biomes where things can live. Okay? All right, it's the sum of all the planet's ecosystems together. All right? And this examines the influences of energy and materials on organisms across the biosphere. What is the most prominent thing or situation that we're talking about in terms of that would affect global ecology?
Ozone depletion.
Ozone depletion is part of it. Global warming, climate change, right? Because that's going to affect everything, right? We lose this polar ice caps. That's going to change whether or not how temperate our climate's going to be. That's going to raise the sea level X amount of feet. That's going to change the landscape in terms of where the oceans end, okay, the coastline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So this is sort of the hierarchy of ecology as it is. Okay? Different levels, different set points, but they are all related. Okay? So you don't basically study one at a side. Okay? In the slides that I posted on Moodle, I have an explanation of each one of those levels that we just talked about, so you don't have to. Hopefully you're taking notes now, but if you're cool like Ben, you don't have to. But they are also written down. Okay? So now a general understanding of ecology. Let's get into what affects it. All right? Obviously, the Earth's climate, we just talked about climate change, influences the structure and distribution of terrestrial biomes. And you will be expected to know 8 different terrestrial biomes and the characteristics of each. Okay? And the 5 or so aquatic biomes and the characteristics of each. All right? So the long-term weather prevailing conditions in an area constitute its climate. We can talk about local climate versus like climate in the northeast versus the southeast. And then we can talk about global climate, which is all over the place, right? It obviously differs depending upon where you are, right? And those 4 major abiotic components of climate are temperature, sunlight, wind or air currents, and precipitation. All right? And each of those influence the overall climate of an area. All right? More or less sunlight, more or less precipitation. Okay? So your abiotic factors are the non-living chemical and physical attributes, how much precipitation, how much sunlight, average temperature, and then you can include wind currents in there. Right? All right? Your biotic factors are the other organisms that make up the living component of the environment. What trees are there, why they're there, all right? What vegetation's there, what animals are present or absent, and why. And those abiotic and biotic factors depend upon each other, okay? Obviously, you can't live in the ocean for an extended period of time, right, for obvious reasons. With that, we can break it down to a macro versus microclimate. A macroclimate consists of patterns on the global, regional, and landscape level. All right, so the climate of the Northeast, New England, would be considered a macroclimate. Even though we're just talking about one part of the country or one part of a continent, it is still considered a macroclimate because you're looking at changes that affect a large area. All right? A microclimate consists of very fine, localized patterns. All right? The something that's happening in the pond back here, a tree falls and there's something that's happening underneath the tree, a fallen log or whatever it is, that's different from what's happening on a grander scale, on a larger scale. All right? There's differences in, let's say, under a rock. Right? You move a rock, a number of organisms, insects, etc. are there, right? Yes? There's a difference in the temperature that's underneath the rock as opposed to outside. All right? There's a difference in terms of precipitation or humidity that's there, right? So there's a difference in the amount of sunlight that is present. Okay? You move the rock, you've now changed the overall abiotic and biotic factors that are exposed to that, and you have altered the landscape or the climate of that area. Right, so a microclimate. Questions on micro versus macro climates. All right, so global climate patterns. What influences global climate? We mentioned changes in global climate change. What influences global climate? All right, so obviously the amount of sunlight, right? So we talk about the amount of sunlight, which then leads to a warming trend, all right? Amount of sunlight is different in terms of depending upon what, though? Thickness of the ozone layer, toxins or gases, CO2 that's available that's present in the atmosphere as well. Okay, So let me talk about it this way. In North America, every year, right around springtime, you will notice that there's a big change in gas prices. Right? Towards the end towards say March, February into March, maybe even early April, gas prices tend to go down before say May when they start to come back up again. Why? What's happening at that point in time? And it's related to toxins in the air and global climate change, etc. What's happening around March? It's warming up. Why? What's happening?
Spring's coming.
Spring's coming. We're changing seasons. And what has happened in terms of the type of gas that has changed from winter into spring?
In the winter, don't we use like a certain type, so like engine as well as?
So there's a difference. There's a different type of gas that's refined and then distributed to gas stations in winter as it is in the summer. The reason why is what happens in the summer. There's more driving, right? And there's more sunlight that's exposed to that, right? To that area. Okay. When there's more sunlight, it tends to be warmer, yes? So gas companies have developed a refinement process that actually reduces CO2 emissions over in that formulation. Okay? But it's not suitable for winter temperatures. Okay? So what has happened is that they actually change over their formula over time, and they need to get rid of the winter grade gas, so gas prices go down in order to get rid of it, right? there's more demand because they're going to switch over. They switch over to the summer brand, and then it sort of gas prices go up because that refinement process is more expensive. All right, but the reason why they're doing it is because in order to reduce CO2 emissions, so that to help prevent global warming overall. All right. So, but that is directly related to a change in what? We go from winter to spring, where there is a change of seasons, right? But the change of season is directly related to what? Your latitude, right? But what's happening in terms of change of season? Why are we moving from winter to spring?
Rotation of the earth.
Right? The tilt of the earth, and that affects what? Temperature, which is directly related to the amount of sunlight. Okay? So seasonality, what we'll talk about in a little bit, is important for climate. It gets warmer in the spring and summer because we are exposed to more, right, extended daylight. And then there's also has to do with the tilt of the earth towards the sun as well. So we have latitudinal variation. The fact that the further north you move, colder it gets because you are exposed to less sunlight. All right? So it's the curved shape of the earth. All right, so sunlight strikes the tropics between 23 north and 23 south most directly. What is that area called? All right, so you have the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23 north, 23 south, respectively. And then 0 degrees is the equator. So between that area, that band, you have a longer amount of sunlight and more direct sunlight. So that tends to be warmer. That area is characterized by warmer days, right? Average temperature somewhere in the low 80s, right, throughout the year. Less drastic changes in terms of seasonality, right? Spring and fall and winter are basically all the same. All right, the higher the latitude, where sunlight strikes the earth at an oblique angle, light is more diffuse and you get more changes in season. All right, so here's your low angle of sunlight, and you see coming in, that affects your seasonality over time. All right? And so when the earth is twisted like this, okay, and sunlight comes in this way, you end up with less amount of sunlight, right? That means there's less amount of sunlight during the day, comes at an oblique angle, it's not as intense. Then you are at winter, right? Then when it's twisted like that, okay, and you end up with sunlight that comes in this angle, you have more intense sunlight, then you end up with summer. Okay? Seasonality depends upon the tilt, right, and the intensity, right? With that, we have global air circulation and precipitation patterns. All right, where does most of our weather come from? Our precipitation, air currents come from which direction? Mainly west, right? So, California, then to Colorado, to the Midwest. Eventually, we'll get to the east, right? For the most part, weather patterns move from west to east. Why? Has something to do with Earth's rotation. What else? What's the main? What's pushing the weather from west to east? Wind air currents. What is the name of the air current that does that? You've all heard it. You've seen it on the weather reports on the Weather Channel, right? They'll sort of give you something that looks like this. They'll give you here's the weather. This is a very bad United States, Maine, Massachusetts, okay? Here's your weather. Here's the United States. right? And then they'll show you this sort of weather current or air current that moves from west to east. Okay? And I just deleted Texas. Annexation of Texas. All right? This air current that moves west to east is called the Gulf Stream. Okay? And for the most part, if this air current is above you in terms of latitude, you end up with nice, fair weather. The weather current, this upper level air current drives weather west to east. Okay? Sort of, it's an air change. All right, so what occurs is that you have warm, wet air rising near the equator, right, creates precipitation in the tropics, and then you have dry descending air at 30 degrees north and south latitudes cause desert conditions, right? So you not only have movement of air currents left or west to east, you also have air currents that move sort of up and down, all right? Because hot air does what? Hot air rises, right? And cool air descends. Okay, so what occurs is that over the equator, warm air rises up, okay, and actually will move from in the equator from east to west. And then we'll move from, because where do our hurricanes come from? They come from the tropics, right? And they move from, say, off the coast of Africa, across the tropics, into the Caribbean, where they have a more shallow, warmer seas, right? Produce more storms, and then they veer off towards the northeast or towards the United States, based upon air currents that come off the coast of Mexico. All right, and that will push hurricane storms into the United States and into the Atlantic Ocean. All right, that is all depending upon air currents and precipitation patterns that move them from east to west and west to east. All right, so here are an example of, you have your trade winds versus your westerlies. Okay, and basically the cutoff is that 30-degree north. Okay, so you have your northeast trade winds, and right about here, off this area right here, in this, these are the trade winds that will push a hurricane, a weather pattern. I do a little storm or a little hurricane thing, from east to west, right, into the tropics, which are over here. All right, but then at some point, this hurricane will start to push north, okay, depending upon what is the predominant wind pattern at that time. Okay, so then it gets pushed, and then meteorology is the whole trying to predict where this is going to go, etc. Okay? Questions on that? All right, so we talk about hurricanes in the northern hemisphere. What are they called in the southern hemisphere? Typhoons. Right, and they actually spin a different way. So then you have regional effects on climate. So we know that it's affected by seasonality, large bodies of water, and mountains. All right, seasonality. We've talked about the change in seasons here versus, let's compare the Northeast to Florida. Give me a difference. Talk to me about the difference in seasonality. It's not as cold where? In Florida, right? It's not as cold. Their winter is a little more temperate, right? It's not as harsh as opposed to why is it, what else? What about, do you know about the summer in Florida? It's hot. What else? It's humid. Different from here? Yes. Okay. Why? A lot of moisture. Where does that moisture come from? the water that surrounds it. So they have this big body of water to their west, the Gulf of Mexico, that's constantly bombarded by sunlight, and a lot of their weather patterns, especially the thunderstorms in the summer, come from the west off the Gulf. Okay? Dump a lot of rain over the peninsula, all right? Lots of precipitation. That is a stark contrast to here, whereby we have mountains to the west, right? That affect and change the precipitation that is present in. So seasonality, seasonal variations of light and temperature, right, increase steadily towards the poles, right? So more further now towards the poles you end up with larger differences in terms of light and temperature. You closer you get to the pole, you end up with like 30 days of night, 30 days of sunlight, 30 days of no sunlight, etc. All right, and the high latitudes is caused by the tilted Earth's axis of rotation and its annual passage around the sun. All right, so whether or not you're tilted towards or away from the sun affects the sunlight, right? The amount of light you're exposed to. There are belts of wet and dry air that are straddling the equator, right? They shift throughout the year. So that wet air, that shift, that moisture, that leads towards the production of storm systems such as hurricanes. And your changing in wind patterns also affect ocean currents. Okay? So wind patterns drive overall ocean currents. Is your seasonality, right? So at the March equinox, you see that the Earth is sort of tilted, a constant tilt of about 23 degrees. All right? But when we're in summer, you can see sort of the September equinox. What's an equinox? What does an equinox refer to? Equinox, what does that sound like? Equal, which means they're roughly 12 hours, equal amount of daylight as opposed to nighttime. All right, so about 12 hours of exposed daylight, 12 hours of unexposed, right, away from the sun. Whereas the solstice is what? More or less. In June, the tilt of the sun, right, we're tilted towards the sun, we end up with having an extended period of daylight, right, more exposure of daylight, right, longer days, as opposed to December when we're tilted away, where you have less. Okay? So questions on that drives seasonality. All right, so the tilt, right, the angle, and how much sunlight you're exposed to, right, drives seasonality. On Wednesday, we'll talk about temperature and precipitation changes, all right, mountains that also affect climate. These slides are posted, and I will also post the video this afternoon. Questions? Okay.